This is All the Things with Michelle Wolfe. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of All the Things. I am Michelle Wolfe, and I am joined by one of my dear friends, Angel Pricer. Angel, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Well, I guess first of all, I'll say it is a wonderful experience to be a dear friend of yours, Michelle. And I feel like everything that I do in my life is in service to love. And having friendships with people such as yourself really are a testament to just the way love moves in the world. And I am, I guess, primarily an artist. An alchemical artist would be my first tag for myself. And in that, I process the pain of human suffering, of my own and others, through the process of making art. And I share that technique, those tools with other people in a really heart focused and centered way. And also offer astrology readings and mentorship for people who want to go a little deeper with what their natal chart has to offer. So that's just a couple of the things I do.
That made me tear up. Um, and thank you for, as you were saying that, describing what you do, I'm reminded of all the things that we have done together, in our time, the metacognitive drawings, just, the astrological readings that you've done for me. You have such a beautiful way of looking at the world and processing. And I I think something that connects both of us is our ability to go really deep into things and just really excavate everything with so much care and love for the world, for ourselves. So I'm just so grateful to have you in my circle, really.
Thank you, Michelle.
So we came together to talk about, gosh, we could talk about so many things. We'll have to have another conversation probably dedicated to um, alchemical art and moving through creation because that has been, I still do metacognitive drawings when I'm
Aw.
struggling, to like put words to my emotions. I'll just get my colored pencil or whatever and just start doing it and writing, and I always think of you when I do that. Thank you for bringing that practice into my life,
You're
truly.
welcome. I love that. I love to hear stories of how people make it their own and how it shows up for them
And
in
heart
this
math
way.
too.
Yeah,
My
yeah,
goodness.
yeah.
When I'm really stressed and struggling with like being able to breathe properly, I always drop into my heart and breathe through my heart. And that was incredibly helpful. So truly, like for someone like me who I process things quickly and deeply, it's been life-changing, really, having these practices for my anxious mind, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So, but we connected recently on struggles with our children, and the school system, and just the
Mm.
way that it is, the way that we have this sort of structure, right, that we have to show up for, and that we don't really have a lot of say in, I feel. Um, and I struggled this week actually with Gavin, my son, having um, some anxious moments before school and the struggle of a 13-year-old going through all kinds of changes, trying to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:30 in the morning. He's exhausted, and people will be like, well, you should just get him to bed earlier. Yeah, sure. You try putting yourself to bed earlier when your circadian rhythm is not ready to go to sleep. Like we just go against our biology.
Mhm.
And I so much want for us to be able to thrive. And we've talked about that there are different ways of doing this. So,
Mhm. There sure are, Michelle. I remember the day that we were supposed to get together for a talk, just like a regular old talk,
mhm,
right? And then you said, Gavin was sick
mhm,
and you had to go to the doctors to get an excuse.
Because we
And
had missed 10 days already.
right, yeah. And I, during that time, was in the process of fighting a truancy hearing for my own son. And it was just like the timing could not have been more perfect as an invitation for us to talk about it. And you pointed to a lot of things there, like the anxiety and the exhaustion that are experienced perpetually. And where where is the place in the school setting for that to be addressed for what it is, instead of just telling kids, yeah, but
You
you
need to
just
get
need to
over
go,
it.
right, you need to go and do this
Mhm.
thing. And I think that um we have what, 7 or 8 generations now of individuals who have been brought up through the public education system. And there are lots of people out there looking at, okay, what have we gotten from this system? And the inability to process emotional content that we as adults have, that we then pass down to our children generationally, is showing up in the world and all of the things
Mhm. And
everywhere.
it's as a parent who drops her child off in the morning and I can see him, like, I can feel how soul crushing it is. And, to think that, like, nobody really cares. Like, you just have to go. Sorry, you just have to go. This is the
It
way that
just
it is.
It's just the way it is. Yes, Michelle. And that comment right there comes up a lot.
Mhm.
And it comes up a lot in families. Generationally, um, grandparents can be wonderful, and they can be also unwitting agents of the system of
Sure.
oppression that
Mhm.
they really don't want their children to have to be a part of. And yet they don't see another way out of it. But the truth is that there are ways out of that. And from my perspective, and especially in the most recent experience that I've had navigating the school and my child's mental health and physical health, uh, and making that a priority based on the longstanding life experiences that he's had that make it really difficult for him to function in a school setting. Um, to shift my perspective from fighting the school to taking a stand for my child
Mhm.
and his well-being. And I think that's always been in the periphery, because I've had 3 other kids, or 2 other kids, so 3 total kids that have all needed that advocacy in the public education system. And let's not even talk about how I wanted something different for them, but because of our family, that wasn't available. So being in the position of advocating for my kids in the public school system and feeling like it's a fight, it's a threat. There is bullying behavior that is happening from the administration to the kids and their parents. And that is, like, when you think about it that way, and then you see the bullying that happens between kids and the really negative mental health effects. I mean, I don't know what the top number of deaths are by suicide for our young people, but I think that that's like the biggest one,
It's
suicide.
concerning.
Yeah.
It's very
And
concerning.
it really is. And we can't trust the system to fix that. That's not going to happen. So
As you
we
know.
yeah, we have to be the people who stand for the health and well-being of our kids and our families. And that goes against, quote, the way things are.
I was just looking up for a quick stat, and it says this is from the American Psychological Association. More than 20% of teens have seriously considered suicide. And suicide rates from 2001 to 2021 went up 62%. I mean, that's alarming.
Yeah.
And I
And
don't think that it's because, I hear sometimes the shaming and blaming of, oh, we're making our children, today's youth they're just so emotional, or they're sissified, or, and it makes me sad to hear that, because instead of seeing that way, can we maybe acknowledge that actually it takes a strong person to be in touch with your emotions and learn to manage them and to be able to express them. And that doesn't make somebody a sissy for having them. Um, and yes, we do need to build resiliency. I do believe that. But can we do that without trauma, you know?
yeah, well, the just going back to that generations of being in the public school system and all of the people throughout all of our lineages who have not been able, for reasons of safety and
Mhm.
actually to be able to stay alive, they were not able to be with the emotional content of their existence. And a lot of times, if you've had that kind of rough upbringing, you're just kind of in that place of, well, I didn't get it.
Right.
So why should they be any
And I
different?
turned out okay.
Right.
And that's something too. It's that people, even if we think of the school system, right? Because it's a system, l- it's like we don't want to look at ourselves and think, well, this happened to me, and but I'm fine. Like we don't want to look at ourselves and think that maybe that could have been done differently, and wonder what I could have been had I had a different kind of support. And even in the school system being very defensive of itself, right? Like they don't want to look at themselves and think that this great system that they've created, that they're handing over to all of us, free public school, is actually, has some flaws. Like, that seems hard to admit.
Well, it's anytime our worldview is challenged, we're going to be defensive. And that is just human nature. And so, any kind of conversations that actually move toward a better world for all beings has to include some ways to be okay with not being okay. And our culture is
Mm.
not okay with that. So we have to be really purposeful in our pursuit of leading with love in the world. And not everybody wants to do that. And that's okay. If you are someone who says the public school education was great for me, it's been great for my kids, it's great for my spouse, whatever, whoever else in my life, then no problem.
Mhm.
This is not a conversation that you're interested in, and that's all right. But for people who, adults even, who feel like school was a soul crushing experience, I mean, it was for me. And then to see your kids have a similar experience with, you know, who they are and how they are and are not able to express that in the world, then you have to try to find a way to do something different. And it's not going to happen. I mean, you can try partnering with the school, and sometimes there are people there who get it and who want to work with you and who are also exhausted and overwhelmed because they're fighting the system that they work inside of.
Mhm. And that's so challenging, because at some point I feel like we just sort of do run up against the bureaucracy of it all. And um, I don't know. I appreciate, I've said this before, like I do appreciate one of the positive things that came out of COVID for me is, and that I witness for others, is virtual school. And I know that people have opinions about that. And um, I've heard concerns about the lack of socialization, and, that they're more isolated, and certainly, kids in situations that don't have access, and or there's all kinds of things. But I like that it provided another option for learning. And I know quite a number of people at this point in my immediate circle whose children are using that and they're doing so well, you know? So,
Yeah, it it is high time that we have more options than
yes.
just going to school every day. And
And
that virtual option was and still is in some cases great for a lot of kids. And there are also reasons why it doesn't work,
mhm,
which is why you have to ask yourself, does it work for me and my family
right,
or
right,
not? Either way, it's okay, but it doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
right.
And I mean, I think culturally we're geared toward otherizing and judging and blaming and
Mhm,
but love, again, coming back to love, doesn't do that. So if we have ways that we can connect in our hearts and know what is right and natural for our children, because a lot of going with the way things are simply goes against nature and goes
mhm,
against natural child development. And if if we are going to align ourselves with love, we're aligning ourselves with nature. And that's not something that's really supported in the structures and systems that exist right now. So the way through that, from my perspective, is gathering people who are oriented toward love and who want to bring more of that into the world and practicing together when the stakes are low and then being able to build that resilience naturally in the places where the stakes are higher. And as far as our kids being isolated or not receiving the social stimulation that they need, so much of that can happen regardless of where they are.
mhm,
Like isolation is a big deal, whether you're sitting at a screen at your home doing your schoolwork or you're at school or any other kind of engagement. And I think it's because we are isolated as individuals within the world. We're all trying to do what we need to do so we can pay our bills and feel some sense of safety, however fleeting it may be.
mhm,
Which is why, again, coming back to community efforts of, you know, there's something to be said for small groups, lots of small groups that have, you know, people who belong to certain groups together and apart, but just this way of connecting individuals who are focused on and rooted in love and how that can change what happens within these systems as they are themselves changing.
mhm. I appreciate that you keep bringing it back to love because it really does for me, that's like it my concern for my children, it comes from a place of love. And I want them to have better than what I experienced. And I want them to have a voice, in their experience. And so much of what felt sort of soul crushing for me is, when you express that, this is something that I'm really struggling with and it continually falls on deaf ears,
Mhm.
and it creates suppression, emotional suppression. And then we know that emotional suppression then it's going to come out in some way, and it usually comes out in the body, in the nervous system. It creates all kinds of dis-ease, you know, and then that's what they spend their adult life having to overcome.
Right. And there are a lot of people in adult bodies who are still manifesting childhood trauma.
Mhm.
And, we could have a whole other conversation about what is trauma and how it's not just the most obvious and awful things that happen to us, but existing, growing up in a chronically invalidating environment
Mhm.
is trauma.
Yes.
And that same thing happens everywhere. It's perpetuated all over the place. I mean,
And readily accepted.
yeah, or even rewarded
Yeah. Yes.
because because we just need to keep moving on.
Mhm.
You know?
And the idea that this is what you need to do, because how are you gonna be able to hold a job in the future if you can't even sit in school all day?
Well, this is one of those things that I've encountered and have heard people say, like, it's because I love him or her that dot, dot,
Yes.
dot. But the problem is the dot, dot, dot after that is fear based on things that have happened in the past or projections on what you think might happen in the future. So it prohibits us from actually just connecting with the love space in that moment for our child. But I'm going to tell you, and I know you know this, our children are wise.
Oh, yes.
Children have something to teach us. Every generation is like that. And if we just think that we know better and we're going to tell our kids what to do, they're going to show us that that's not okay. And the number of kids in schools who have been identified as having an emotional disturbance, like I
Mhm.
don't know the numbers on it, but I know that that's growing. And how do we meet the needs of kids like that? And how do we also recognize all the places where that's happening where they've not been identified yet? And then where is this happening within their homes, within their families? You
Mhm.
know, I don't think any of us are particularly consistently emotionally fluent and available. So it's not really a blame. You know what I mean? It's
No,
just,
it's a
this is just
collective.
actually how it is.
Mhm.
That's really how it is. Like, and then what can we do with that? How can we be with our emotions in a way that connect us and also set us free?
And how can we give space, like, as you were talking about I was thinking about diagnoses for children, and ADHD is something that has been on the rise. And, there's the sort of question of like, well, is it really ADHD, or is it just that what we are expecting of a child to be able to sit in a seat for 8 hours, have 15, 20 minutes of time outside in sunshine, that just, and my daughter, who is 10 years old right now, but I remember it was just a couple years ago, um, she referred to school as a prison. And then we had this conversation, her, me, and my son, and he said to me, he's like, "How is it different? We have to go, we can't leave, we have to ask to go to the bathroom, we can't go outside." And this, I think he was in fifth grade at the time, or maybe like, so his recess was cut in half or something because they're trying to prepare him for middle school where you don't get that anymore. And that makes me so sad. And that's one of the like I that's one of the things that makes me a proponent of virtual school, because then I, as the parent, can be like, okay, go outside. Unfortunately though, because most of his friends would be in school, he doesn't have anybody to play with, so it's like it's not a perfect system for sure.
No,
Either way, whichever you choose, you know?
right. There aren't any. There aren't any perfect systems, and there are no easy answers. And there's
Mhm.
no, we're going to roll this effort out and it's going to just take care of everything.
Well, there's
And
no one size fits all for sure, and yeah.
yeah, the, your reference to the prison, like imagine if kids were really given the space to express how they feel, that, and that it's not judged as wrong.
Mhm.
And that they're taken seriously and that their feelings are validated, which doesn't mean the same thing, by the way, as agreeing
Right,
with.
right. Oh, that's such an important distinction. Mhm.
It's a really huge uh, divisiveness to think that if we don't agree with someone's feelings, we can't also accept that they're valid. But if we were able, and I think this is what happens with parents, if, as parents, if we have the spaciousness for it, first of all, because let's face it, parenting is hard, working is hard, especially if you work a job you don't love and you're just trying to do all the things. there's not a lot left of you at the end of the day. And this is where the 1% pivots come in. Even like a 0.5% pivot sometimes is just enough to create the space to maintain those connections with, like what your son said about likening school to prison. And then like beginning to explore that together, the themes, the concepts, because kids need a way to make sense of this world as it is. It's scary. It's scary for anyone, but especially if you're a child or a young adolescent or someone that's approaching the age of 18, for a lot of those kids, they're like, what am I moving into here?
Mm-hmm. Um, look at some of our notes from what we talked about. We talked about we talked about sleep deprivation. And I think that's an important thing. I I remember when Gavin was 9 months old, I could not read enough about sleep because he was not a great sleeper. And some of that was gastrointestinal, learning what he needed and what his sensitivities are, and being a first time parent and learning his cues, understanding him. Um, but I remember reading that, and then subsequently through my schooling, sleep is so important for us as human beings. We if you think about our brains as, these supercomputers, we need that time. That's like our defrag, like everything gets organized where it needs to so that we can wake up in the morning and be fresh and ready for another day. And so much about our biological rhythm, we have a biological clock, our circadian rhythm, and it's different for all of us. I have always been a night owl. I just have always been that way. My daughter is just like that. Gavin he was a go to bed early kid, early riser. And now that he's an adolescent, that is shifting, and I can see that. But you know, you couldn't get me to go to bed early. Like my mom was just telling me the other day, she's like, I used to send you up at 9 o'clock, but you'd still be in your room awake 10:30, 11. I just couldn't make myself go to bed before I was ready.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that there aren't times that I'm so tired now that I'll go to bed at 9 or 8:30 even. I mean, I've had those nights, but you kind of just I follow what my body is telling me that I need. And
Mhm.
so when we know for our brain development, for our body development, our mental health, that we need more sleep. But we force ourselves to conform to this, you know, we call it 9 to 5, but it's not really. I mean, it's more like 6:37 to like 6. That's a long day, and that is exhausting. And so then we talk about cumulative deficit of sleep, and you can't make up for that. Like you need real rest. Our kids, especially at the ages that they are, need more rest for their bodies to go through what they're going through. And that is something that, knowing what I know now, I look at that and it's so disheartening. Because I'm like, we know better. Come on. Can we not do better? Can we not change this?
Right. Well, isn't it curious that we can know this and yet in practice, we use sleep deprivation everywhere. They do it in the military. They do it for doctors in residency.
Hmm.
They do it in our school systems. You know, they there's a lot of conflicting information between what we can know, measure, and ascertain, and then what we expect humans to do.
Hmm.
And then you can add into that the shaming and blaming because parents often get blamed for their kids showing up tired, for their kids
Yep.
showing up hungry, for their kids showing up cranky and unprepared. And this is just another one of the ways that the system pits us against each other, teachers against parents, and it's subtle. Most teachers are not going to just come right out and say bad things about parents, and they aren't probably always thinking it either. But I've heard enough times well, if these parents would only, right?
Yeah.
And
Get
on the
your
other
kids to bed
side,
sooner.
right, if
Yeah.
these teachers would only, right? Like, so we can do this all day and pit this me against you kind of scenario that we can see where that's taken us so far. Look at the world. This is
I am happy to see some communities across, even across our country, but certainly other countries, testing shorter work weeks, shorter school weeks. Um, and I think that we will glean a lot from those case studies, those community case studies, in time. So this is something that I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because I think it kind of just adds to the bigger conversation that is happening now on. I think it's getting more attention, although it's still kind of subtle, like it's feels a ways off, but
mm.
that's because I'm impatient.
Well, it's
Um,
slow. The
it is.
progress is slow. But and so what do we do? Like in the school district where my son was and now is not anymore because we decided to stop participating with that free and appropriate education that he's entitled to, which was pretty much shoved down our throats during every IEP meeting that we had last year and this year. Um, so taking a pause from that, saying, no, I'm not going to do this, you have to really have some support and know what your rights are. Because guess what? The school is not going to tell you what your rights are. They're going to tell you you have one right, and it's the right to a free and appropriate
Mhm.
education. And if you don't come, I don't care what you're going to tell me about that. If you miss this many days, it's going to become a legal matter.
Yes. And you
Yeah.
can get in trouble. And as a parent who has to deal with that, I have to tell you, it's very stressful.
Well,
When he misses a day of school now, because he's missed 22 days now this year. And part of that is because we took 4 days to go to Florida for um, family time, which I'm glad that we did that. It's not convenient, but it is what it is. But 22 days and you start to go, oh my God, like I just now when he has to miss time, I find myself anxious.
right, exactly.
And
And
that's
when you're anxious, what does that do to the connection that you can have with your child?
Well, for us, I would say it's a bonding thing because I'm very much like listening to him, but at the same time, I feel like I can't help him. And I feel sort of helpless to his plight. And
Mhm.
that feels very disempowering.
Right. So there are things that, I mean, every school district is different, but there are supports in place. There's the 504 plan, there's an IEP. So the case can be made, especially with the 504 plan, for things like if a child has insomnia. Um, these are some places that can be explored through cooperating with your medical providers and the school district. But it also doesn't guarantee that the school district will take it seriously. And this is where you can go to other places like the Department of Education, the State Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education. And the funny thing is, there are documents. I think I sent you that one about the social, emotional, and mental well being
Hmm.
of students. There are documents out there that speak to all of these things, but to actually find school districts and administrations that are practicing that with a human focused approach as
Mm,
opposed to a student focused approach, um, and there aren't a lot of them that
yeah.
I'm aware of, and certainly not in this area.
And I do say, when my kids talk to me about some of these things, like why are we only having 2-day weekends? It's not enough time, mom. I say to them, like I want them to know that they can change these things. I want them to feel empowered to like, no, I agree with you. And I felt the same way. And I'm here to support this. And, I in my mind, I'm not saying this out loud, but in my mind, I'm like, I don't really know what I can do about that. But having conversations about it out loud is one thing I can do. Being willing to be a voice where other people might listen to what I have to say and be like, she's crazy, or she's too soft. I'm willing to be seen as those things because I agree with them. We need more time. We need a better balance, and I want us to be able to achieve that. I think their generation is I feel like they're change makers. That's just my intuition about them, and I want them, but they need a support system. And I feel like we are here to do that for them. So to help bridge that gap.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so important for them to feel like there is someone who gets it,
Hmm.
and that someone is also in a grown-up body, because there are plenty of examples of grown-ups who are exhibiting that they don't get it and that they don't actually care or
Hmm.
value what's inside these kids. And so if you can't express it and you can't feel safe doing that, then you're suppressing it. And then what do we have is more illness, more addiction, more of all of the things that just distract us from the immense pain of being a human alive in this world the way it is right now. It is really hard. And there's also so much beauty.
Oh, so much. And that's something that I really try to impress upon them is, I want to validate their experience and their feelings. And, I want them to learn to overcome obstacles and build resiliency. I think that's important. But I also want them to know that we can be innovative, and I'm open. Like, what ideas do you have? Like, what do you think we could do? What would look, and just giving that opportunity for them to think about that. Sometimes that's enough. I'd still like to be able to do something with that, to implement something. But I think, and that's kind of what we gathered here today for is just sharing the message that, we don't have to be beholden to the structure as it is, that there are other options, and it's okay to explore other options. It's also okay to explore another option and decide maybe that one doesn't work for you and try something else. Like, it's an exploratory process. It doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have to be able to confront the unknown if we're going to be in an exploratory process. And that's why the kinds of things that I do in my work are geared towards that. It's um, finding comfort in those places of discomfort. Because if we can be uncomfortable and still be stable with our children and have these conversations, that is building resilience all on its own, because we're
Yeah.
navigating a threshold that most people don't get a chance to cross. And as far as the expectations to, have those moments of overcoming hardships, the metric for that is so huge and usually really vastly out of proportion with the developmental ability of a
Hmm.
child. So we're constantly measuring what they can do against something that they can't really
That
yet.
even adults struggle with.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So celebrating those small achievements
Hmm.
and growing them is something that we can do. And I think we have to do as parents if we want to have any hope of creating a world where our kids can truly thrive.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for talking about this with me today. Is there anything that you think that we didn't cover that we should offer before we sign off?
Hmm. Well, I just want to thank you for the invitation to have this conversation. And I think it's vital for more conversations like this to be happening. So, one of the ways that we are doing that in our business at Full Color Living is by offering practices, free community practices to anchor into that heart space so that all of those places that we go in the world where it's harder to bring that love and take a stand for love become a little easier. So I would just say any way that your listeners can find to connect with more people who are focused and devoted to heart centered living, find those people, get together with them, and have the conversations.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I just appreciate you so much. And I appreciate what you are doing in your workspace, but just what the love and energy that you put into all the things that you're doing. So thank you
Thanks,
for having
Michelle.
this conversation with me today. And I will, when I share this, share some resources for anyone who is interested in just gathering more information. So I'll put some links out when I share this.
Sounds good. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me for this episode of All the Things.